This is getting into making industrial music, part 5. So in this part I'm going to discuss hardware synths and samplers. My name is Shayne Lawrence. I'm in the industrial metal hip hop project Twitch, and yeah, this is the getting into making industrial music video series. So, where to start? What you should be thinking of when you're looking at your first piece of hardware synth gear. I'll get into a bit of philosophy here. So, when I purchased my first synth, my Yamaha EX7, the reason why I chose it was because I had received a piece of advice from a website that is now defunct, which I think was called New York Industrial Front. I get it. I'm in Canada, but I'm reading a U.S. industrial forum, but or website. But they had some really good advice, and it was a combination of New York Industrial Front and Dark Sonus. And New York Industrial Front basically laid it out like, okay, so you know, when you're looking at your first and maybe your last synthesizer purchases, you want to think of what you're going to be using. What first of all, what do you want in a synthesizer? Like, you know, do you want a sampler? Do you want it to synthesize sounds? You know, do you want it to have FM synthesis or some kind of subtractive synthesis or something like that? You know, you want to have an idea of what kind of sounds you want to make. Maybe you don't know anything about synthesis, but you have an idea of, you kind of want to have an idea of what you want to do with it, how you're going to utilize it. Are you in it for the long game? Like, do you want something that is just going to be like, oh, quick and easy, and I'll just pick it up just because it's cheap, and then I'll pick up something, you know, that I really want later, and you know, at least I'll have that small synth, cheap synth, just so I can whet my appetite temporarily. And my thinking is when you're picking your first synth and maybe your last synth, you wanna think about how you're gonna use it, and you know, don't pick a synth that's like, oh yeah, this has some of the features that I want, but you know, I can't afford to get the much more expensive one right now. And my suggestion is save up for the more expensive one that you really want, rather than picking a bunch of smaller gear. And this is the advice that New York Industrial Front got into, and I think Dark Sonus got into this as well a little bit. You know, pick something that's going to be long term and that you're going to want to use for the rest of your music career, or for as long as the synthesizer lasts. Yeah, think of the long term. 10 shitty synthesizers equals 1 good synthesizer. 10 good synthesizers equals 1 amazing fucking synthesizer. And maybe that isn't the way they described it, but that's how I'm describing it for this example. So, you know, when I was, you know, figuring out what synth I wanted, you know, to be quite honest with you, I had actually seen this before. I'd read that advice and this synthesizer, and you know, I'd played around with it and hadn't really thought of it. I looked at the price and I'm like, oh fuck, you know, $2,500. That's got to be a fucking good synth, right? So, you know, I played with it a little bit in a music store when I was living in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and you know, hadn't really thought of anything after that. And then I moved to Calgary, and I was wandering around and found this music store on 17th Avenue in Calgary. It was I think it was a Yamaha, maybe not Yamaha, but there was, I think the upstairs was a piano store, and then I found this electronics synthesizer store down the stairs just next door kind of thing, and I saw this over in the corner. I was like, hey, this looks fucking cool. And I was reminded that I had seen this previously in the store in Saskatoon, and so I was like, hey, fuck, they have headphones hooked up, cool, I'll try it out and just mess around with it and just see what the sounds are like. So I played around with it, and I was like, fuck, this sounds amazing, like this has everything I fucking want. So at this point I hadn't even seen the New York Industrial Front stuff like that. This was the New York Industrial Front advice, and the Dark Sonus advice came much later. I think it was a year and a half or 2 years later. But anyway, saw this synth, thought it was awesome, listened to it, played around with it, sounded amazing. And so after I'd played around with it, I went to the cash register, the cashier or the attendant there, and I was like talking to her. She's like, hey, I noticed you like that Yamaha synth, and here's a brochure, and you know, it had all these fucking awesome details, and I was like, fuck, this looks cool. And you know, I think they had a couple other brochures there that I didn't end up picking up as well, and of other synthesizers. And so I think it was like a year later or a year and a half later, I decided that I wanted to definitely get a hardware synthesizer, and I had seen at that point I'd seen the advice on New York Industrial Front and Dark Sonus, and actually it was I'm pretty sure it was just New York Industrial Front, because I hadn't seen the Dark Sonus stuff until much later. Anyway, it doesn't really matter, the minor details, but so New York Industrial Front, saw that advice, and I was like, because I was reading it, and I was like, fuck, like I can't afford this synth right now, and I want to get something. And then I read the advice, and it's like, you know, pick something that you're actually going to use, and you know, think of the long term when you're picking hardware synthesizers or samplers or whatever. And I was like, fuck, okay, if that's the case, then that's sound advice to me. Like, why not pick something that I'm going to use in the long term? Like, to give a little perspective, and this is the perspective that they gave as well. You know, like in the old days of electronic music or industrial music, you know, they had a lot of the older bands, they have like shit tons of gear, and the reason for that is because the gear was limited. In order for them to get more sounds, they need to have multiple units of these pieces of gear, like multiple units of the DX7 or whatever it was, or multiple samplers and stuff, because you know it's run out of patch memory and they can't program it anymore because there's no memory left in it. And I think people get caught up in this idea like, oh, Trent Reznor has all these fucking synthesizers, he has one of everything or whatever it is, and it's like, well, there's a reason for that, and there's a reason why like Ministry has a ton of synthesizers, or at least they used to, or even Depeche Mode or something. I know that's not industrial, but you know, dark electronic stuff. You know, Depeche Mode has shit tons of gear, and that is the reason why, is because a lot of that gear was limited. In order for them to have layers of sound that they wanted, they had to purchase the extra stuff to get the extra sounds. And you know, as time has progressed, obviously synthesizers and stuff and samplers and all that kind of stuff has gotten cheaper, and even nowadays it's like, well, do you even need a fucking hardware synthesizer? Because technically you don't. You don't really need a hardware synthesizer. I think they sound better than software synthesizers, but you don't need a hardware synthesizer. You know, if you wanted to, you could strictly have software synthesizers. You know, just strictly have, like, you know, your digital audio workstations. You have all your software synthesizers in there, or VSTs or whatever it is, and you know, you have a MIDI controller, and that's all you have. And you know, you could totally fucking do that. There's nothing wrong with doing it, and that's, you know, it's actually affordable that way. And you know, nowadays you don't need that kind of stuff. Like you can write an album on a fucking phone nowadays, you know. So but that's just perspective. Like back then, sure, you needed all this gear. Nowadays you don't need a fucking thing. And this obviously is like a vanity purchase. Well, maybe not a vanity purchase. Like, I always knew I wanted it. It was just like I didn't necessarily need it, I just knew I wanted it. And my advice is that if you're going to get a hardware synthesizer, get something for the long term, something that you're going to use in the long term, not just a bunch of shit that you're not going to fucking, you know, you're just going to set aside and end up selling, and then end up spending more money to get the better stuff, or better stuff. Yeah. So what I'm going to say here is, I can't determine what a good synth is, or what a great synth or an amazing synth is. To me, this is fucking amazing. So in the end, you know, maybe a fucking $200 synthesizer is amazing to you. Maybe that's, you know, maybe the Archer Mini Brute is fucking amazing to you, or the Micro Brute, or a Novation Bass Station or something, or Novation Ultra Nova, or whatever it is. Maybe those are amazing to you. I'm not going to tell you what to buy. I'm not going to tell you what a great synth is or what a shitty synth is. In the end, you have to decide that. What I'm suggesting is pick something for the long term that you know you're going to use for the rest of your music career or your life, whatever it is, and you'll be much fucking happier. You won't be picking shit up that you don't necessarily want, and then selling it in the end, and then having to pay more money for newer synths, and just keep that fucking cycle. And you know, so that is my advice regarding hardware synthesizers and samplers. I will leave some recommendations as far as some starter gear that you might want to consider. I'm not going to say it's something you should buy. I'm just saying, if you're trying to learn about hardware synthesis or synthesis in general, these pieces might be good to purchase. And, you know, actually, you know what? I'm not going to leave a recommendation, to be honest. Because I went off the deep end. You know, like I took a leap of faith and purchased this, and this, you know, this is, you know, I didn't just get a starter fucking thing. I think, to be quite honest with you, I think getting a starter synth is kind of a not dumb, it's just, it's, you don't need a starter synth to learn about synthesis. Like, you can grab any fucking synthesizer that you want and learn synthesis using that synthesizer. And I really don't think that starter, at least for hardware synths and samplers, I don't think there really is, you know, they're really, you know, there's no such thing as a starter. Like, you know, just get what you truly want. And you know, if it's $2,500 and you know you're going to use it in the long term, you know you're going to use it for live shows, you know you're going to use it for recording, whatever it is, you know, sequencing, sampling, whatever it is, then get that. If it's a cheap mini brute or something, and that's your amazing synthesizer. Get that. Doesn't matter what the price range is, just as long as you know that that's the synth you want and that you've kind of always wanted ever since you had set your eyes on it or whatever, and you know, you determine what an amazing synth is, and you determine what you're going to use for the long term. So now I mentioned this in the first part of this video series. You know, how do you go about affording this stuff? And you know, this is something that most people know. I mean, some people don't. You know, you have to save, you have to budget for this stuff. You know, some people get to it slower, some people get to it quicker. It depends on your motivation. And you know, like, you know, there's many different ways of going about and saving and getting the stuff you want and getting started. And yeah, there's many ways of going about and doing it. So if you're an entrepreneur, maybe you do something entrepreneurial. If you're not an entrepreneur, maybe you have a job or a side job or whatever it is, or maybe you sell art or whatever it is. You know, do something and then save, and then get your fucking gear and your computer, your audio MIDI interface, your MIDI controller if you want that, or, you know, your soft synths, your digital audio workstation, your hardware synths, whatever it is, you know. And yeah, I think that's it. I'm not sure if I'm going to continue this series of videos, but I thought I would just kind of truncate each little section of the original video, and you know, kind of go into a little bit more detail, and you know, some of the mentality and all that kind of stuff, and some of my recommendations and all that kind of stuff, and you know, just kind of bite-sized chunks so that you guys don't have to fucking watch a 30-minute video or whatever it is, or however long the original video is. But I do have another series called So You Want to Play Industrial Live, and if you already have all the gear and you're wanting to get into the live spectrum, then definitely check out that video series. Yeah, I think that's it for now. If you if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you feel the information is valuable and you want to share it with your bandmates or your friends, obviously share it. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section. I'm always open to any kind of question, any like gear stuff, anything, like yeah, anything. Like if you have a question about, like, well, yeah, if you, any question, just fire away. And if you enjoy what's on this channel, please subscribe. And yeah, I think that's it for now. See you in the next video, fuckers. Yeah.